Now we're going to turn to our guest who has written a book. He's written several books, but this particular one that we carried, Infowars.com, Survivors, talks about what's going to happen after the collapse or what leads up to it and the things that people did to prepare. It's Survivors by James Wesley Rawls, a novel of the coming collapse. And Jim Rawls is a former U.S. intelligence officer and survivalist. He's got survivalblog.com, and he's been writing since the mid-'80s, since he got out to college. So let's welcome him on the show. Hey, Jim, how's it going?
Just fine. Thanks for having me on.
So I read this book, I guess 2 months ago. Somebody had left it on the book counter, and the cover is what caught my eye. You got a guy walking in on a horse. He's got an AK with no stock strapped to his back. And there's fires and basically, something out of a scene of the road. Looks like he's walking into. So tell us a little bit about Survivors.
Sure. Survivors is a novel set in the near future. It describes a classic hyperinflation and socioeconomic collapse that's very severe. It brings the power grids down and essentially brings our national economy to a grinding halt. And it's a sequel to my novel Patriots, which has been kind of a perennial favorite in preparedness circles since the early 90s. And it follows a number of characters and their reactions to the economic collapse and how they scramble to how they react, how they pull through that situation. In my first novel, Patriots, I had the main characters were fairly well prepared. In Survivors, which is set in the exact same time period but different geography, the main characters are not very well prepared for the collapse. And I get the opportunity there to talk about a lot of alternative ways to get through hard times.
Right.
Techniques and technologies.
To me, it seems like this book is geared toward people who may have been thinking about these types of issues, but they aren't going into the action phase. They, the one lady's hoarding seeds. She doesn't really know why, but, she's gotten some advice and she's going to hoard seeds. The one group who has the farm out in the West, they find that their father was really well prepared when they break open, the wall. I'm giving some of the book away, but they break open this wall and find a cache of silver and guns and, stuff. So it shows that what I like, that it's not totally impossible to get yourself prepared. Even if you've only done one or two things, you could still get in that mindset and still continue along the path, because, this is something that even our government officials are saying that could happen within 2 years now. They put a timetable on it.
That's right. And of more immediate concern, we're looking at a Greek financial crisis that may come to a head in as little as 5 weeks. There's a lot of concern that the Greek crisis could, in addition to just breaking apart the European Union, cause massive bank runs, a major liquidity crisis with cascading margin calls rippling their way all the way around the planet, stock market collapses, bond market problems with failed governmental bond auctions. It could be a serious, serious problem.
I agree. And what I've been telling people in my circle of friends and the people I know is that what you're going to see in Europe, we're 2 to 3 years down the line is going to happen here. We've got a little, I think by being so spread out, I think there are things that would take longer to hit some places than others. But definitely in the cities, you're going to have, some immediate problems, say if the electricity goes out for some extended period of time. But what in your opinion, what is Europe going to do if once these, countries like Greece and then Portugal, Italy, when these smaller countries start to go bankrupt, what do you think is going to happen to the rest of Europe?
Well, it's very difficult to predict, but suffice it to say, I think we could see, at the very minimum, some large bank runs and a collapse on the of the FTSE in England and all the other major stock indices in Europe, starting with the financial stocks. We could very well see considerable turmoil, and if it turns into a global credit collapse, it could have some very wide-reaching repercussions. One of the great imponderables is the derivatives market. There are hundreds of trillions of dollars in derivatives in play at any given time. And because the derivatives market is essentially new, it's really built up just in the last 8 years, it really doesn't have a track record. It wasn't there in 1987 when they had the stock market collapse then. There was no real derivatives market at that time. Well, there was a fraction of what exists now. Nothing near the scale that exists now. So the counterparty risk for derivatives is huge. And if entire counterparties disappear, and some of those counterparties are actual sovereign risks, as in national governments, if those governments can't meet those obligations, the implications could be enormous.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to your book. One of the things I like about the book, and if you guys want to get an overhead shot of this, that'd be great, is, and a lot of people do this, but your quotes, I really liked each one, and I had to read a couple of them several times over. But in chapter 3, you have a Thomas Jefferson quote, probably one most people have seen. If the American people ever allow private banks to control the issue of their currency, first by inflation, then by deflation, the banks and the corporations will grow up around them, will deprive the people of all their property until their children wake up homeless and the continent their fathers conquered. The issuing power should be taken from the banks and restored to the people to whom it properly belongs. Now,
that I think is actually a paraphrase because they didn't use the terms inflation and deflation in that time period, but it is a good one.
Yeah. Well, I liked how you started each chapter with one of those, and how, you've got the one character who's in the he's in the army overseas, and he's got to make his way back through a Europe that has also collapsed, and using gold and silver. Talk about some of the things. I forget the character's name right off the top of my head. His
name is Andy Lane. He's an army captain,
right, who's
released from active duty in Afghanistan just as the collapse is unfolding. And he's sent back to Germany as part of his out-processing, but then he ends up getting stranded, and there's all the commercial flights have been grounded, both because of the economic turmoil and because of some hijackings and bombing terrorism that's going on. There's no flights going back to the United States. Even the military airlift command flights have been totally disrupted. So he has to find his way back to the United States in the midst of all of this. It makes for a pretty dramatic story.
It does, because he doesn't come right back to the United States. He has to make his way.
The story away, but
yeah,
he has really great adventures on the way.
He does, and it's a great book. One of the other parts is the bad guys in this is a roving gang that just grows and grows and grows as it goes and just conquers each kind of holdout settlement. What kind of research did you do into this gang type of warfare that could happen?
Researching MS-13, which is a particularly violent gang, and their modus operandi really isn't too much different in the novel from what they do today, except if you end up in a situation without rule of law, where there's a vacuum of law enforcement, the gangs will have the opportunity to, run rampant and take over entire towns. There'll be basically no one to stop them other than the local citizenry, and if they can overpower or intimidate them, I think there's a potential for gangs taking over at least small towns quite easily, and that's what I portrayed in the book.
Right.
I see until the third book, where I describe the comeuppance of that gang. People have to wait for my second sequel to Patriots, which is titled Founders. That's coming out in November of this year.
Okay. And one more section in Survivors that I thought was interesting was the way people were forming bonds in communities out of necessity. People would show up and they had supplies that would help with another group, specifically the husband and wife who are flying in their little flying machines and ending up in places, and then they pick up and take off. I guess what's the mindset of people? The mindset of people that are going to have to rebuild communities. What is going to happen if we do get into a crunch situation?
Well, in the crunch, I think people are going to have to either pull together or perish. There really needs that. If there's going to be any rebuilding, it really needs to be done from the bottom up. If the experience of Hurricane Katrina taught us anything, it is that disaster response fails horribly when it's from the top down.
Right.
But the response from the bottom up, from the community grassroots level, can be quite effective. And in both my novel Patriots and later in Survivors, I described how people do that.
Well, and I noticed that there's not a lot of government solutions in this book. In fact, there seems to be a lack of government.
The second part of it, where just like in Patriots, there's a foreign occupational army that comes in, and there's a war of resistance against them. But that's the only real government that springs up in terms of top-down government, and it's bad government. And a lot of the drama in both novels involves trying to restore constitutional government.
So, what got you started into writing on these subjects? What was your impetus for that?
I was an Army intelligence officer, and a lot of my research, and some of which was in the classified arena, led me to believe that modern societies are very fragile. And I recognized in all these country studies, seeing country after country, where the fragility of the system can meet a brick wall and things can fall apart very quickly and easily. It's happened again and again all over the world. And then I recognized the fact that our own society was even more fragile because we have even longer chains of supply. We have an even greater dependence upon the power grids in particular and technology in general. And that's why in the winter of 1990, 1991, I began drafting my novel Patriots.
So you saw the handwriting on the wall of something that could potentially happen.
Right.
If, well, some things we can't stop. I know that we can at least speak out against our governments that are, and the banking systems that look like they are imploding this stuff by design, on purpose, and just so they can go around and collect up the pieces after they fall.
Yes, in my conversation with Alex Jones earlier this week, part of our conjecture was whether there might be a planned economic collapse, but both Alex and I wondered if that situation might get beyond their control. Mm-hmm. They might stage a crisis as part of the Hegelian dialectic, but then if the reins of power get out of their hands, if society collapses so completely that there's no longer a functioning military, no longer a functioning law enforcement system, and no longer a functioning financial system, basically it's out of their hands. They basically have created a house of cards. It will fall in front of them, and they won't be the ones putting things back together.
Right. No, it's going to be up to us. And that's what people have to look in the mirror and realize, that the solutions are not going to come from the government. They're not going to come from the police. These guys are going to be trying to protect their families. As you point out in your book, at this Air Force base, all of a sudden there was nobody there minding the armory, and that's because these people are going to be running to the hills as well, or trying to take care of their families and their loved ones.
Right. It is important that people plan ahead and that they stock up and train as best as they can. It'll only be the families that are well prepared where you'll have people that can keep an eye on the big picture.
Right.
Be part of the real solution. Because if you're worried about where you're going to get your next meal, you're not going to be in any position to be one of the ones that is restoring order.
Well, let's go into some of those things. What can some people do to prepare? What are like a top 5, I guess, that people can do right now?
The top of the list would be water filtration and identifying open water sources that you can draw water from.